Okay, as we explore more of the Han Dynasty, we're going to take a look at the philosophy of Confucianism. This is the official philosophy of the Han Dynasty and would become the philosophical belief system that best characterizes China throughout its long history. So let's get started. Alright, the wisdom of Confucius. Here's the background on Confucius. He was born in 551 BC. This is a really horrible picture of him because we don't really know what he looked like. Why anybody would draw this picture of him, I don't know. It's not very flattering, but we really don't know what Confucius would have looked like. So I'm sure it wasn't this unfortunate. Okay, he lived during what's known as the Warring States period. This was the period of time in China that followed the Shang and Zhou dynasties and was characterized by a lot of fighting between different states who were trying to unify China. Okay. Now, he lived a scholarly life, so the sorts of things he engaged in was he taught history, music, and also moral character. So a lot like, let's say, Socrates might have been in ancient Greece, so a lot of similarities there. Alright, he also wanted to restore order and harmony to society. Again, he lived during a period of warring states, and so he wanted to see an end to that conflict, and he wanted to restore order and harmony back to Chinese society. Now, he had lots of ways that he thought that this could be achieved. The most important thing that he thought that people should focus on was what was called filial piety. This is an important term that you'll need to know. Basically, filial piety means respect for one's parents. And that's above all other duties, even loyalty to the state. So this is an idea that even today in China is still very strong, that people need to be loyal, in particular to their parents more than anybody else, even to their own government. So again, filial piety is more important than, say, nationalism. And so a child is expected to basically do what their parents say, dedicate themselves to their parents, take care of their parents in old age, and basically commit their entire life to the well-being of their parents. That's essentially what filial piety is all about. Okay, so what was the impact of Confucius? Confucianism's impact? Well, he wrote a book, and it was called the Analects. Now, he didn't really write the book. Actually, this book is a collection of his sayings that are recorded by students after his death. And it's important that you understand that he didn't discuss any religious matters in the text. Basically, it's not like a Bible, let's say, but it's very similar in its origins to, say, how the Christian Bible emerged. Remember, Jesus never really wrote a book. He didn't write the New Testament, and most of what's in the New Testament is really just a collection of his sayings that have been written down by his own followers, his disciples, after his death. So in many ways, the Analects of Confucius are a lot like the Christian New Testament, except that the Analects really don't focus on religion. Essentially, Confucius's only comments on religion was that, yes, there is gods and there is a heaven, but essentially don't worry too much about that. You'll have plenty of time to worry about that when you get there. In the meantime, you should worry about the here and now. So Confucius's philosophy is really about this life, not the next life. So again, it's not seen, the Analects are not seen as a religious text as much as they are a philosophical text about the way you should live your life. Okay, let's take a look at the 5 relationships. The 5 social relationships are what Confucius believes is the sort of foundation upon which society is going to be built. Remember, he lived in a time of chaos during the Warring States, and he wanted to end that chaos. For him, not only was filial piety important, but he also believed sticking to these 5 relationships was the way to make that chaos go away. So let's take a look at what he has to say. First of all, the chart's based on the idea that there are inferior and superior roles. So some people in the chart are going to be inferior to others, and others are going to be superior to them. Okay, so let's take a look. The first one we got there is ruler. So the ruler is in a superior position over the subject. The next one on the chart is that the father is in a superior role to the son. And then we have husband over wife, we have elder brother over younger brother, and we have friend to friend. Now the friend to friend one is a little bit interesting because it's the only one that's based on equality. Friends are equal to each other. Nobody's superior, nobody's inferior. They're actually equal. We'll come back to that a little bit later and discuss that in more detail. But the other ones are pretty clear, right? So the ruler's over the subject, father's over the son, husband's over the wife, elder brother's over the younger brother. The guys at the top are in superior roles, and the people at the bottom are inferior. In addition, each person has to fulfill their role without question. So if I'm looking at the chart, you can see someone like the ruler is actually in a superior position over the subject. But if you also notice, there's an arrow that has two arrows on it. So the arrows are representing a sort of a two-way street. And what that means is that although the ruler is in a superior position and the subject's inferior, the ruler also has some obligations. He's obligated to be good, to be moral, to be ethical, to do the right thing, and to be a good role model for his subjects. In exchange, the subjects are going to obey the ruler, do what they're told, and basically, obey the dictates that the ruler may issue. Now that also applies to the relationship between father and son. Yeah, the father is in a superior position over the son, but the father has some obligations. He has to be a good father. He has to be a role model for his son. He has to do the right thing. All right? He has to provide for his son. Now, the son, on the other hand, has to obey his father and adhere to his father's wishes and do what his father basically tells him to do. If dad's good, moral, and ethical, and a good role model for his son, then the son will do that without question. Just like the subject's going to do that for the ruler, if the ruler is also good, moral, and ethical. This also applies to husband and wife. Yes, the husband is in a superior position over the wife who's in an inferior position. But the husband also has some obligations. He has to be a good husband. He has to provide for the family. He has to take care of the wife. And in exchange, the wife will basically adhere to the husband's wishes, do what he asks her to do, and obey him. All right? So there's a two-way street there. With elder brother and younger brother, it's very similar. The elder brother has to be a role model for the younger brother so that he can sort of guide him and show him what it means to be a good son, perhaps. Okay, now again, friend to friend is equal, so there's no sort of inferiority there between the two. So these sort of roles are really important. It's really important that people obey their role, that they stick to the role that they're supposed to do. Okay, so it looks like it might be unfair and uneven that the superior people get to tell the inferior people what to do, but in fact, both sides are obligated to sort of meet the needs of each other. That's why there's two arrows going in two different directions. Now, what does this mean? It's going to help society free itself from chaos. This looks like a rigid system, a rigid social system. Remember, what Confucius was trying to do was end chaos in the warring states world in which he lived, and he thought that by having people adhere to these 5 social relationships, that would help bring an end to the chaos, especially if people fulfilled their roles. Okay, so let's move on and take a look at this. This is an example that comes from the Analects, the book written by Confucius, and it says, the governor of Shi, a place, said to Confucius, quote, in our village there is a man nicknamed Straight Body. When his father stole a sheep, he gave evidence against him, unquote. Okay? So the story of the stolen sheep is pretty simple. There's this guy in town, he stole a sheep. His kid basically turned in his father, gave evidence against him. All right, so that's the scenario that Confucius is confronted with. So what I want you to think about is how might Confucius respond? If I look back at the 5 relationship chart, I need to ask myself, what would Confucius think? What would Confucius think of this guy named Straight Body who apparently turned his father in because his dad stole a sheep? Okay, now that you've had some time to think about this scenario and the chart below, I want you to maybe consider some of the possible options that might be available. All right, so first of all, how might Confucius respond? Well, some people might say that the son, down here on the bottom of the chart, is actually a bad son because he's turning his dad in. And that would be unfilial for his son to do that. He's not really obeying his father, and he's basically turning his dad in. So other people might say, well, actually, he's being a good subject because, in fact, as a subject, he's actually going to be doing what the ruler wants, so he's obeying the law. So the problem here is we got 2 different things. The son's not just a son, he's also a subject. So he's a son to his father, but he's also a subject to his ruler. So if he's going to be a good son, he has to obey his dad, and he has to cover up the fact that dad stole a sheep. But if he's going to be a good subject, he should really tell the ruler, because I'm sure the ruler has a law that says stealing sheep isn't good. So the son, in many cases, doesn't quite know what to do. There's a contradiction that's built in, and it makes it really difficult to understand what actions a person should take. Should they cover up for their father, or should they turn their dad in? And the problem is, in many cases in Chinese history, the tragedy here is that people don't know what decision to make. And oftentimes sons will sort of kill themselves rather than make the wrong decision. They don't want to have to make either one of those choices, and so they choose tragedy instead. The Chinese seem to like their tragic stories, and so this is a sort of common theme in Chinese film and Chinese literature. What I want you to consider, though, is a couple other things. Let's look at the dad. Some people might say, well, maybe the father is a bad father. I mean, after all, he's stealing a sheep. I mean, what kind of lesson is that to teach your kid? That it's okay to steal sheep? That stealing is okay? That could be a problem as well. So maybe the son should turn his dad in. After all, dad's stealing sheep. Okay, again, it's still problematic. Now, Confucius would look at this and say that it's not that complicated. So the question here was, how might Confucius respond? Well, let's take a look at how the answer is, how Confucius would actually respond to this. All right, first of all, Confucius answered, in our village, those who are straight are quite different. Fathers cover up for their sons, and sons cover up for their fathers. Straightness is to be found in such behavior. So that's really important. Confucius is basically saying the good son covers up for his dad because his dad stole the sheep, that he shouldn't have turned him in. And that's interesting because in American society you would think, okay, you got to turn him in. He's a bad guy. He broke the law. He stole a sheep. The kid should obey the law and do the right thing. But in this case, that's not what this is about. Confucius is thinking about something completely different. So let's take a look at this situation one more time. We've got dad, we've got sheep, and we've got a son. Okay? What you need to understand from Confucius's perspective, this is not about the father. The father is irrelevant. Whether he's a good dad or a bad dad doesn't matter. The father himself is not important. You also should understand that this isn't about sheep. Whether or not you steal sheep or you borrow somebody's sheep that you shouldn't, that's not the issue. It's not about stealing. It's not about sheep at all. It's also not about the child. In this case, it's not about any of these things. It's not about the father, the sheep, or the child. What it's really about to Confucius is this, and that's son. Not son, the individual, but the role of son. Remember, these are 5 social relationships. These are roles that people are supposed to adhere to. And what's important is that the son, whoever it might be, adhere to the role. He must fulfill his role as a good son. He must be filial. He must obey his parents, no matter what. And the father, again, it doesn't matter if the dad's a good dad or a bad dad, is irrelevant because the father has to fulfill his role as well. Now, even though dad in this case is not fulfilling his role and is stealing the sheep, okay, he's being a bad father, he's being a bad role model, that's not relevant. What's relevant is that the son still has to be a good son. He has to fulfill his role, even if dad isn't being a good dad. Just like a subject has to be a good subject, even if the ruler is not necessarily being a good ruler. What's important isn't the individual, but it's the role that the individual occupies. In this case, the child actually occupies the role of son. Alright, so let's take a look at this. The role of son is the first role that a child plays in life. So it's important. If a child is going to get the role of son really well, that means later in life he might actually be a really good elder brother. It might also mean that eventually he'll be a really good husband. And if he's a really good husband, he might one day even be a really good father. And potentially he'll be a really good subject. And that means that he'll actually master all the roles that he'll have to have in life. Again, he might even be a good friend. Who knows? He might even become a good ruler someday. But this is the case. If he doesn't fulfill his role as son, if he blows it as son and he gets it wrong, then he probably won't be a good friend, and he probably won't be able to master being a good brother, or a good husband, or a good father, or maybe even a good subject. And as a result, he won't ever get good at being any role in society, and that's not a good thing. Also, if the son basically decides to do whatever he wants to do and not be filial, then that's a problem as well. He's being an individual. And if the son goes off and does whatever he wants, then what's stopping the wife from her doing whatever she wants, or a younger brother doing whatever he wants to do, or subjects doing whatever they want to do? If everybody's off and they're doing their own thing, then what you're going to have is chaos. And that's exactly what Confucius was trying to get rid of. He's trying to limit chaos, and he's trying to bring order to society. You have order by everybody following their roles and sticking to their roles no matter what. But if everybody goes off and does their own thing, then society's going to fall apart. Okay, so if a child can master his first role, then he can master every role that follows. That's important. Okay, so what's the goal here of filiality? Filiality's goal is to teach a generation how to cooperate effectively so that they can be virtuous model citizens later in life. If everybody fulfills their roles and everybody acts as a role model while doing so, then other people will see them. If you're good, you're moral, and you're ethical, and everybody sees you being good, moral, and ethical, they'll want to be good, moral, and ethical too, and that will make the world a much better place in the eyes of Confucius. Okay? So, what's the impact then of Confucius's ideas? In particular, it had a huge impact on government. The best ruler was considered to be a virtuous man. And that encouraged rulers to take advice from wise and educated people. So a good ruler listens to wise people, listens to educated people, but he also acts in a virtuous manner. He's good, he's moral, and ethical. And if he's like that, then the subjects will see him being like that, and they'll want to be just like that as well. So, how did Confucianism spread? Well, it spread because it never became a religion. Confucianism was always a philosophy, and it didn't deal with religion or religious matters hardly at all. In fact, Confucius said, don't worry about it. Yeah, there's a heaven. There are gods. You can worry about them when you get there. In the meantime, worry about the here and now. It was also spread by his students centuries after his death. So many of the words that we attribute to Confucius actually come to us from his students. And it would become the official philosophy of Han Dynasty China. So during Han Dynasty, the Han Dynasty rulers decided that Confucianism would be the philosophical tradition that everybody would follow. It would become the official education system of China. All the kids in school would study nothing but the works of Confucius, the Analects of Confucius, the words of Confucius, Confucius's favorite songs, and that's all that would ever be on the test. And what constituted being an educated, scholarly person was your ability to understand and know about Confucianism.